Everyone here matters, except Madison from client services. That sentence didn't just echo in the conference room, it detonated. 40 pairs of eyes snapped toward me. Some shocked, some amused. One or two, sympathetic. But most, waiting to see what I would do. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I didn't let my expression break. My manager, Brett Chandler, stood at the front of the room beside the Q2 revenue charts, as if he hadn't just thrown me under a bus, with a smile on his face and a laser pointer in hand. He kept talking something about retention numbers and client growth. I didn't hear a word. My pulse thundered in my ears. My face was burning, but I stayed still, anchored in my chair, notebook open on my lap, like this was any other Thursday meeting. Like my entire career hadn't just been reduced to a punchline by the man who had taken credit for my work for 6 straight years. I could feel the air thicken around me. My coworkers shifting in their seats. A few glances quickly looked away. A few didn't. A few smiled. 6 years. 6 years of 4 a.m., emails, client calls on weekends, emergency deck rewrites, and always staying silent because I believed hard work would speak for itself. Turns out, it doesn't. Brett was the voice. The suit. The guy with the charm and the title. I was the one behind the curtain, building everything. And yet, here I was. The exception. The failure. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been humiliated in front of people you worked beside for years and realized, in that moment, they were never truly with you? If that question hits a little too close, you're not alone. Drop a comment and share your story. You never know, your words might help someone else feel seen. Because what happened next? It wasn't just revenge. It was a shift in power that changed everything. And it started the moment I decided I wasn't going to let him write the ending to my story. Not this time. I didn't always hate working at Shoreline Metrics. In fact, when I first walked through the glass doors 6 years ago, I felt hopeful. I was 25, fresh out of grad school, armed with a marketing degree and a resume built on internships and late-night freelance gigs. I had ambition, energy, dreams of doing work that mattered. Brett Chandler had interviewed me himself. He wore a navy suit that probably cost more than my entire student loan balance and spoke in these polished, executive tones that made you feel like being average wasn't an option, at least not if you worked for him. "We're building something special here," he said, leaning forward with a practiced look of sincerity. "I need people who understand that success comes from sacrifice." I should have paid more attention to that line. Instead, I nodded, eager, naive, and told him I'd give the job everything I had. And I did. For the first 2 years, I said yes to everything. Extra shifts, weekend prep work, late-night data scrubbing, strategy proposals, branding decks, client briefs. If there was a fire, I was already holding the extinguisher. Brett praised me often, but never in writing, never in meetings, and definitely never in front of clients. Instead, he'd take the polished decks I made, swap the title page, and walk into executive rooms like they were his to command. He'd throw in a few business book quotes and my original opening anecdotes sword for word, then flash that signature smile while shaking hands with people whose names I had to research and memorize. The first time I saw him present my pitch to the Redwood account and receive a standing ovation, I felt proud. Stupidly proud. I told myself, this is how it works. One day, it'll be your turn. But the days kept passing. The projects kept piling up. And the credit? Always went to Brett. Every quarterly newsletter, every team huddle, every end-of-year review, he was the name tied to every win. The rest of us were just support. I wasn't the only one. Jordan in analytics once built a predictive model that saved a client $2-3 million, and Brett turned it into a case study for his leadership philosophy. Shay redesigned our entire brand identity only for Brett to debut it on LinkedIn with the caption, "Proud of the vision we brought to life." Even Theo, who'd navigated a client crisis at 2 a.m. while Brett was vacationing in Aspen, got a quiet thank you. And nothing else. We joked about it sometimes, after hours, over cheap wine or shared fries. If Brett ever leaves, Jordan said once, the entire company will realize he doesn't even know how to log into our dashboard. We laughed. But it wasn't really funny. We stayed quiet because we needed the jobs. The references. The healthcare. The paycheck that barely covered rent, but still mattered. We endured because that's what people do when they've been convinced they're lucky to be tolerated. Looking back, I don't know when the turning point happened. Maybe it wasn't a moment. Maybe it was a slow erosion, the kind you don't notice until you're standing in pieces and wondering when you stopped being whole. What I do know is this. By the time Brett stood in that room and called me a failure, he wasn't just wrong. He had no idea who he was talking to anymore. Amaron Tech wasn't just another client. It was the client. The kind of deal that could redefine a company's entire quarter. Maybe the whole year. Their budget was massive, their reach international, and their reputation spotless. If we landed them, it would catapult Shoreline metrics into a new league, and Brett made sure we all knew that. He'd been trying to get a meeting with them for months. Endless cold calls, LinkedIn messages, referrals from mutual contacts, nothing worked. Their executive team, especially CFO Rebecca Lynn, was known for being unapproachable, private, focused. Unimpressed by flashy pitches and big agency energy, as she once called it in an interview. After yet another staff meeting where Brett declared, "They're impossible to crack," I stayed behind in the conference room, scrolling through old Amaron Tech press releases, digging through their corporate blog. It wasn't work I was assigned to do, it was a hunch. A feeling. I couldn't let it go. That's when I found it. A brief mention of Rebecca Lynn volunteering at a local adult literacy nonprofit on Saturdays. Low-key. No PR photos. Just a name buried in a donor list and a volunteer schedule posted on their outdated website. The following weekend, I showed up with a stack of used books and a volunteer badge. I didn't introduce myself right away. I helped shelve titles, carried donation boxes, sorted genres. It wasn't until the third hour that Rebecca turned to me and said, "You're new." "I am." I smiled. I figured if I'm going to organize other people's ideas for a living, I might as well help organize some books too. End of. She laughed genuinely. And just like that, we talked. Not about sales decks or strategy. Just about words. Literacy. Her favorite book growing up. Mine. It wasn't forced. It wasn't a pitch. It was just human. Eventually, she asked what I did. I told her I worked in client strategy at Shoreline Metrics. Her eyebrows lifted. "Your firm's been persistent," she said. "You're the one behind all the pitch emails?" "No," I said honestly. "That's Brett Chandler, our head of business development. He's confident." Rebecca gave a half smile. "Confidence has its place." "It does," I nodded. "But I prefer listening first." 2 days later, Amaron Tech emailed Shoreline requesting a meeting with one condition. I had to be present. When I told Brett, he clapped me on the back like we'd won the Super Bowl. "I knew my follow-ups would pay off," he said. "I'll lead the meeting, of course. You can take notes." I didn't argue. But in that meeting room, as Brett ran through slide after slide, it was clear who Rebecca was here to see. Every question she asked, directed at me. Every glance, every pause, every redirect when Brett interrupted, all aimed at recentering the conversation on me. By the end, she made it explicit. If we move forward, I'd like Madison to be our point of contact. Brett smiled in the room, agreed out loud, shook hands. But the second the elevator doors closed, his entire tone changed. "What the hell did you do?" he snapped. "I talked," I said. "I listened." "That's practically stalking," he hissed. "Unprofessional. It's relationship building," I replied. And it worked. He didn't say another word. But the next morning, he made it clear. He would be Amaron Tech's official contact moving forward hierarchically. It made more sense. And just like that, I realized something that would change everything. Brett didn't just steal ideas. He stole relationships. But this time, he'd picked the wrong one. I didn't quite. I thought about it. God, did I think about it? That night, after the Amaron Tech meeting, I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine and stared at the email I drafted. Polite, professional. Thank you for the opportunity. I've decided to pursue new challenges elsewhere. My finger hovered over the send button. But something stopped me. It wasn't fear. I wasn't scared of starting over. I'd done it before. It was something colder, sharper. I wasn't ready to walk away empty-handed from a place I'd helped build. So instead of resigning, I started watching, paying attention, not just to what Brett did, but to what he didn't. He didn't answer emails after 6 p.m. He didn't handle last-minute revisions. He didn't remember client birthdays or kids' names, or the subtle cues clients dropped when they needed reassurance more than data. I did. I always had. And that's when it started quietly. I created a separate contact list on my personal phone. I printed business cards with just my name and private number, no title, no logo. I gave them out at conferences, after meetings, in casual conversations with longtime clients. Just in case anything ever comes up after hours, I'd say. Sometimes approvals can't wait for morning. They were grateful, and they used it. At first, it was small. A Sunday night message asking for one final tweak before Monday's launch. A text at 6:30 a.m. asking for talking points ahead of a client call. A question during a long weekend. I never missed a message. The official chain of command said Brett managed these accounts. But the reality? The clients were calling me. And I wasn't just responding, I was building something. Trust. Familiarity. Consistency. The kind of intangible loyalty no spreadsheet could measure and no title could replicate. To management, I was still the quiet one. The reliable yes person who kept things moving. But beneath the surface, something else was growing. A network. One conversation at a time, I was laying down roots so deep they'd be impossible to rip out clean. I didn't tell anyone, even the other team members who'd been stepped on like I had. Not yet. Because I needed time. Time to move carefully. Time to make sure every relationship I nurtured was solid enough to stand on its own, without a nameplate or department label. There were moments I doubted myself. Moments I thought, is this petty? Is this revenge? But then I'd see Brett in another meeting, claiming success for a campaign I'd stayed up 3 nights crafting. I'd hear him telling new hires, Madison's great with admin stuff, super organized. And I'd remember why I was doing this. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reality. The truth had been buried long enough. And when the time came, I wasn't going to fight him with accusations or angry emails. I was going to let the truth speak for itself. But first, I had to build something undeniable. Something that no one, not even Brett, could take credit for. Not this time. It didn't happen overnight. No one wakes up one morning and finds themselves holding the invisible threads of an empire. It builds slowly, quietly, almost accidentally. But 3 years after I handed out that first card with my personal number, I found myself in a very different kind of power. A shadow power. You wouldn't see it in any org chart. But if you looked closely, really closely, you'd notice things didn't move unless I moved first. Clients who officially belonged to Brett never responded to his emails unless I was copied. Project approvals stalled until I gave the green light. Deadlines only stuck when I confirmed them. I didn't flout it. I didn't talk about it. But I felt it. And deep down, I think Brett did too. He never mentioned it, not directly. But his behavior shifted. He started micromanaging more, pushing harder for credit, cutting people off in meetings, especially me. It didn't matter. Because the truth was, I'd become the heartbeat behind our top accounts. 16 of our top 20 clients had my number saved under Mad in their phones. 10 of them had never once spoken to Brett without me in the room. 12 had told me, in no uncertain terms, that they stayed with Shoreline because of me. The irony? Brett still got the performance bonuses. He still stood on stage at quarterly town halls, accepting applause for outstanding retention metrics. And me? I sat in the audience, clapping like the rest. But I didn't feel bitter anymore. I felt patient. Because every message I answered at 1 p.m., every crisis I resolved before sunrise, every birthday remembered, every follow-up made, every problem solved, it wasn't just labor. It was leverage. I wasn't building a resume. I was building proof. Proof of who really kept the business running. Proof that couldn't be spun, reworded, or stolen. I started keeping records texts, emails, call logs. Not for revenge. For clarity. Because I knew a day would come when the truth would matter. And when it did, I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't raise my voice. I would simply hand over the evidence and let the silence do the rest. Still, part of me questioned. Was I doing the right thing? I wasn't sabotaging anyone. I wasn't leaking information or undermining company performance. In fact, the opposite. Shoreline was thriving. Clients were happier. Projects ran smoother. Revenue climbed because I cared more about relationships than politics. But I also knew that every day I stayed quiet. Brett got stronger. The board saw him as the face of our success. The CEO saw him as the visionary. The company rewarded the illusion, while the reality sat quietly in a corner, answering emails no one else would touch. I told myself it wasn't time yet. The moment would come. And when it did, I wouldn't need to scream. I'd already built a system stronger than any applause. It didn't wear a name tag. It didn't need a corner office. But it was real. And it belonged to me. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of Tuesday where the air in the office felt too still, like it knew something I didn't. I was reviewing final deliverables for a long-term client when the calendar pinged. Quarterly all, staff review, 10:00 a.m. Same room, same setup. Same Brett at the front of the projector screen, polishing his speech about vision and market growth. I almost didn't go. I almost pretended I had a call or a deadline or a sore throat. But some part of me, maybe instinct, maybe Spike, got up and walked in, notebook in hand. I took my usual seat near the back. The lights dimmed, Brett adjusted his tie. The slides clicked on. 10 minutes in, the presentation shifted. We'd lost a potential client. A big one. The pitch didn't land, the proposal didn't resonate. Brett, of course, had an explanation. There were internal misalignments, breakdowns in message clarity. And then, without warning, he looked straight at me. Some departments, he said slowly, aren't holding their weight, especially client services. The words didn't seem real at first, not in that tone, not in that room. But then the pause came. The turn of heads. The silence. And I knew. This was it. His scapegoat moment. Let's be honest, he continued. Not everyone on this team is aligned with our standards. We can't afford weak links. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. But inside, something cracked quietly, like a dam loosening beneath the surface. 6 years of loyalty. 3 years of building a client network behind the scenes. Dozens of nights spent holding this company together while he collected applause. And now, I was being reduced to a weak link. He kept talking about retention metrics, new leads, team realignment, but I couldn't hear him anymore. I reached down, slowly, and unzipped the side pocket of my bag. Inside was a folder. Blue. Slim. Quiet. I'd put it together months ago, half believing I'd never actually need it. It held no anger, no accusation. Just facts. Email threads from top-tier clients thanking me for saving deals. Text messages with timestamps. Screenshots of chats where executives bypassed Brett entirely. I stood up. Not abruptly. Not theatrically. Just calmly. The room went quiet, like someone had cut the volume on a movie. I walked toward the front, each step heavier than the last. I passed the long oval table. I passed Brett. He stopped speaking. And I placed the folder, slowly and deliberately, in the center of the conference table. "For the board's review," I said. Then I turned, walked out, and never looked back. I didn't slam the door. I didn't say another word. I returned to my desk, packed my things, just the essentials. A sweater, my plant, a framed photo. I left the company laptop on the desk, left the phone in its cradle. Those things didn't belong to me. But what did belong to me? Time, my energy, my worth walked out the door with me. By the time I reached the parking lot, my hands were shaking. Not with fear, with release. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had real proof that someone's been taking credit for your work and finally reached the moment where you had to choose, speak up, or stay silent? Tell me in the comments. Your story might give someone else the courage to take that first step. Because the folder I left on that table? It wasn't revenge. It was the truth. And for the first time in 6 years, the truth had a voice. I thought I was in the clear once I hit the parking lot. The air felt different out there, cleaner, quieter, like the chaos inside the building couldn't follow me past the automatic glass doors. I had my keys in one hand, my tote bag over my shoulder, and a shaky kind of calm settling over me. Then I heard heels. Fast, sharp heels against pavement. Madison, wait. I turned. And there she was. Vanessa Moore, our CEO. She wasn't someone you saw often unless you were 2 floors up or had a title beginning with C. But now she was here, out of breath, one hand clutching the folder I'd left on the table. Even in her tailored blazer and perfect composure, she looked unsettled. "You can't just walk out," she said. "I believe I can," I replied. She blinked. "Look, I know that meeting didn't go the way. My contract requires 2 weeks' notice," I cut in. "I'm happy to provide that in writing." "That's not what I mean." She looked down at the folder in her hand like it had grown heavier in the last 5 minutes. "You just showed me that you personally manage relationships with clients who represent over 80% of our active revenue." She said it like she was still wrapping her mind around the number. I didn't flinch. Now she wanted to talk. Now it mattered. "Madison," she said, quieter this time. "Why didn't I know?" I looked her straight in the eye. "Because you didn't want to." She didn't deny it. Instead, she glanced away and exhaled slowly. "We trusted Brett because he delivered numbers," she said. "No one asked how he delivered them." Silence. The kind that stretches out just long enough to feel like a truth being acknowledged. "Come back inside," she said, motioning toward the building. "Not to the meeting, just to my office." I paused. Part of me wanted to keep walking. Let them all stew in the mess Brett had created. Let them feel what happened when the one holding the threads finally let go. But the other part of me, the one that had stayed late, followed through, held the line for years. That part wasn't done yet. 30 minutes, I said. Vanessa nodded. Her office sat at the corner of the top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows and framed awards I'd never noticed up close. She didn't sit behind her desk. Instead, she took the chair across from me, folder still in hand. "I've spent the last 10 minutes reading emails from your clients," she began. "Rebecca Lynn says she'd follow you to any agency. The Corrigan Group copies you directly on their executive reports. 8 different clients refer to you as their actual account manager." Huh. She looked at me. "How did this happen right under us?" I didn't hesitate. "Because you expected Brett to succeed," I said. "He fit the image, the title, the voice. And you expected me to be forgettable." Her face didn't move, but I saw it in her eyes, realization. A shift. "That's a blind spot," she admitted. "It's a common one," I replied. She studied me for a moment, longer than felt comfortable. "What do you want, Madison?" Not "please don't leave." Not "can we fix this?" Just, "what do you want?" And for the first time in 6 years, I had an answer. I didn't sleep much the night before the board meeting. It wasn't nerves, at least, not the shaky, palms, sweaty kind. It was focus. Sharp, deliberate focus. Every slide, every stat, every objection I could anticipate, I went over them like I was preparing for trial. Because in a way, I was. When I walked into the top-floor boardroom that morning, the view stretched out behind the long glass windows like a promise. 10 chairs, 8 board members. Vanessa, the company's general counsel, and Brett, already seated, calm as ever. He didn't even look at me. But I could feel the tension in the room shift the second I arrived. Vanessa opened with the basics. Madison Grant has submitted a proposal for restructuring our client services model. The board has agreed to hear her presentation, given her direct involvement with our key accounts. I nodded once, connected my laptop, and took a breath. This isn't about one meeting, I began. It's not about a misunderstanding or a personality clash. It's about a systemic disconnect between who we say we are and how we actually serve the clients who keep us in business. I walked them through it calmly, clearly. How our current structure inflated titles and hid actual labor. How client satisfaction dropped when they were passed between departments with no consistency. How retention rose when one person, not necessarily the most senior, became a trusted point of contact. I showed case studies, patterns. I gave them numbers they couldn't ignore. And then, I handed out folders just like the one I'd left in the conference room this time, tailored for each member of the board. Inside, proof of what I was saying. Emails, feedback, direct quotes from clients explaining why they stayed with us. When I finished, the silence wasn't awkward. It was electric. Then came the voice I'd been expecting. Brett stood up, straightened his tie, and smiled. Madison raises valid points, he said smoothly. And I commend her dedication. I didn't move, but I felt my jaw clench. He clicked to his first slide. Client acquisition growth over the past 8 quarters. Our structure works because it allows people like myself to focus on vision and expansion, while others provide daily support. That division is intentional. It's strategic. He kept talking about balance, stability, how too much change would rattle confidence. But I knew what he was really saying. Let things stay the way they are because I benefit from them. He wasn't defending the system. He was protecting his seat at the top of it. I watched the board closely. Some nodded. Some frowned. Some looked undecided. He ended with a polished line. If we restructure too quickly, we risk losing more than we gain. Then he sat. And for the first time in years, I saw it behind the confidence, behind the gloss. Fear. Not of me. Of what the truth might force him to become, once he could no longer hide behind the illusion. I said nothing more. I didn't need to. Because in that room, under that skyline, surrounded by numbers and paper and truth, I knew the decision was already shifting. We waited in the hallway. Me on one side, Brett on the other. The silence between us was too thick to cut with words, too brittle to break with eye contact. He adjusted his cufflinks. I adjusted nothing. This isn't personal, he said eventually, eyes still fixed on the carpet. Everything about business is personal, I replied, quiet but firm. Before he could respond, the door opened. Vanessa stood there, her expression unreadable. The board's ready. We walked back in this time, side by side. But we were no longer equals. Not in leverage. Not in truth. Not in who the board had come to believe. Chairman Evans spoke first. We've reviewed both presentations and all supporting documentation. What we've seen today reveals a misalignment between perception and reality, particularly in how we manage our client relationships. End quote. He paused, then looked at me. Miss Grant, your documentation is both compelling and deeply concerning. It shows a dependency on one person that our current system fails to reflect. That presents risk, but also tremendous opportunity. He turned to Brett. Mr. Chandler, while your argument for stability and role clarity holds merit, it does not outweigh the evidence that our clients' loyalty lies elsewhere. Vanessa took it from there. The board has approved a modified version of Madison's restructuring proposal. Effective immediately, We will establish a new department-client relationship strategy under Madison's leadership. This team will report directly to me. I kept my face still. But inside, something loosened. Something settled. We will also begin a company-wide audit of client ownership records to determine who actually manages each account, based on documented interaction, not title alone. She turned to Brett. You'll transition to business development with a focus on new client acquisition. Once accounts are secured, they'll be transferred to Madison's team for long-term management. His expression didn't crack, but his jaw tightened just barely. It wasn't a termination. It wasn't a public takedown. But it was a clear shift. The room let it land for a beat before Chairman Evans added, "This transition will be monitored. We'll reconvene in 90 days to assess progress and sustainability." The meeting ended. No applause. No handshakes. Just gravity. Outside the boardroom, Vanessa pulled me aside. "We need to announce this today," she said. "I'd rather our staff hear it directly than let rumors take over." 2 hours later, the entire company was gathered in the main conference space. People stood in clusters, whispering. There was tension in the air, the kind that hums beneath the surface before the truth breaks through. Vanessa stepped forward and laid it out clearly, calmly, without sugarcoating. A strategic restructuring. A realignment of client accountability. A leadership shift that reflected actual contribution. Then she introduced me. The new Director of Client Relationship Strategy, Madison Grant. There were murmurs. Some surprised, some nodding, some stunned into silence. But what followed caught even me off guard. She continued. Effective immediately, we're recognizing the leaders behind the work. Jordan Smith will head analytics, Shay Campbell will direct brand experience, Theo Nguyen will oversee crisis client ops. Across the room, I saw their faces change. Not just shock scene. Brett stood off to the side, arms crossed, smiling tightly. His new role wasn't mentioned. And in that moment, it didn't need to be. Because the room had already shifted. And the power? It had followed the truth. The meeting ended, but the shift lingered. People didn't go straight back to their desks. They lingered in the hallway, in the stairwell, near the coffee machines processing. Some came up to me, offering cautious congratulations. Others kept their distance, watching, calculating what it all meant. But the ones I noticed most were the quiet ones. Jordan, standing with a paper cup in hand, blinking like he hadn't quite heard Vanessa correctly when she named him Director of Analytics. Shay, gripping the edge of the conference table with both hands, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, like she was waiting for someone to jump out and say it was a joke. Theo, shaking his head slowly, as if trying to reset reality. These were the people whose work had gone unnoticed for too long. The people who'd stayed late without being asked, said yes to every fire drill project, and stood behind the scenes while others took the bow. I found them later that afternoon, gathered in the break room, still processing. No one said anything at first. So I did. "You earned this," I told them. "Every one of you." Jordan looked up. "I'm still trying to figure out how this even happened." Shay laughed under her breath. "I mean, are we allowed to have titles now?" Theo gave her a look, but he was smiling too. "I think," I said gently, "we just stopped waiting for someone to notice." There was a long pause. Then Shay leaned back in her chair and said, "It's weird, I'm excited. But also, scared. What if I mess this up?" "You won't," I replied. "Because you've already been doing the job. Now you just get the credit." It was quiet again, but a lighter kind of quiet. One that felt like something was finally settling into place. Later that week, we had our first department heads meeting. A real one with an agenda, discussion points, and open input from every leader in the room. They brought ideas. Bold ones. Shay wanted to revamp our brand tone entirely, grounding it in client empathy rather than trends. Jordan suggested a predictive model that would anticipate client pain points before they surfaced. Theo had already mapped out a crisis response matrix streamlined, adaptable, and built around trust. I didn't need to lead every conversation. I didn't want to. Because this wasn't about me being in charge. It was about building a system that finally reflected the work being done. A system that saw people. The mood across the company began to shift. There was skepticism, sure. A few raised eyebrows. A few passive-aggressive comments from those who missed the days of top-down clarity translation, unchecked power. But most? They responded. People who had been quietly holding the company together began to speak up. Junior staff suggested improvements without fear. Cross-department chats turned into actual collaboration instead of political maneuvering. It was subtle, but real. One afternoon, I passed Shay in the hallway. She was leading a brainstorm with 3 new designers, hands moving fast, voice animated. She caught my eye just long enough to smile. And in that moment, I realized something. Recognition doesn't always look like applause. Sometimes, it's the freedom to stand fully in your role without apology. Sometimes, it's watching someone finally take up space in a room they were once made to shrink inside. And sometimes, it's simply knowing that the work you did in silence is no longer invisible. Change looks good on paper. It looks clean in a slide deck. Strategic in an all-hands announcement. Hopeful in a hallway conversation. But when the dust settles, when the excitement quiets and the actual work begins, that's when transformation shows you who's really ready and who isn't. The first week was smoother than I expected. People were curious. Some were energized. Others cautious but cooperative. But by week 2, the cracks began to show. 2 senior managers from legacy departments called impromptu meetings, questioning whether reassigning client relationships based on undocumented intuition was wise. Except it wasn't undocumented. We had emails, call logs, feedback, and meeting transcripts. What they meant was, they were no longer the center of it. One submitted his resignation within 48 hours, said he'd lost confidence in the company's direction. The other tried to hold his ground until one of our longtime clients requested to work directly with his associate instead of him. The hierarchy was crumbling, and not everyone liked the view from the ground. Meanwhile, the newly appointed leads Jordan, Shay, Theo are navigating their own transitions. I'm terrified I'll drop the ball, Shay admitted one morning over coffee. Her voice was quiet, but steady. You won't, I told her. Because you've already been carrying it. Now people just see it. But the hardest adjustment was Brett. He moved into the business development unit, as agreed. No more managing long-term clients. No more standing between real contributors and recognition. And without a team to cover the gaps. The gaps started showing. His first few weeks were rocky. The flashy pitches fell flat without proper data. His confidence, once bulletproof, began to show hairline fractures. Then, one afternoon, he knocked on my office door. He didn't wait for me to invite him in. This isn't working, he said, arms crossed. I need a support team. I leaned back in my chair, measured. Everyone needs support, I said. That's why we're building teams based on collaboration, not control. I can't do this alone. I don't have the analytics. I don't have the design. I can't close without that. You're not supposed to, I said plainly. No one closes alone. You bring value presentation, initiation, but now, so does everyone else. And they'll be credited for it. He looked like he wanted to argue. Maybe even expected me to hand him a solution out of habit. But this time, I didn't flinch. He ran a hand through his hair. Fine, when do we start? We already have, I said, gesturing to the shared briefing calendar on the wall. You're scheduled for tomorrow's pitch. The creative team is looped in. Analytics, too. Their roles are defined, and so is yours. He nodded once. Quiet. Smaller than I'd ever seen him. After he left, I sat there for a long moment letting it all settle. This wasn't about watching someone fall. It was about watching someone learn what the rest of us had known for years. No one builds anything real alone. And for the first time since the shift began, I believed that even the people who once resisted might, one day, find their place in the system they fought so hard to avoid. 6 months later, I stood at the podium in the main hall of Shoreline Metrics. It was our annual company gathering and event that used to feel distant and performative, a checklist in someone else's calendar. But this year, it felt different. The lights were warmer. The applause was real. And I wasn't just attending. I was presenting. The screen behind me displayed metrics most people had once thought impossible. Client retention, up to 2%. Staff turnover, down by nearly half. Revenue per account, climbing. New business wins, steady and team-driven. But those weren't the numbers I was most proud of. What mattered more? 87% of employees now said they felt recognized in their role. 62% said they felt safe speaking up in meetings, up from 19. I finished the presentation, thanked everyone, and stepped down to a quiet ripple of applause. Not thunderous. Not forced. Just genuine. Afterward, as people mingled and conversations circled, I stood by the windows overlooking the city and let the moment land. The skyline didn't look different. But I did. That's when Brett approached. He moved slower these days. Not physically but in presence. Less posturing. More pause. That was a good presentation, he said, hands in his pockets. Thanks. He hesitated. The new structure, it works. Better than I expected. I looked at him. Really looked. He wasn't trying to charm his way back into relevance. He was just stating a fact. It works, I nodded. Because people are doing what they're actually good at, including you. He smiled, faintly. The Meridell pitch? I made the intro. Shay's team nailed the brand. Jordan handled the model. Theo jumped in for crisis backup. And you held the relationship. I finished. He nodded. We couldn't have done it without all of it. It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. But it was something. He turned to leave, then paused. I was wrong about you. Back then. I didn't need the words. But hearing them mattered. Later that night, Vanessa pulled me aside. The board's impressed, she said. Not just with the numbers, but how you handled him. I raised an eyebrow. Handled? They expected you to push him out. You didn't. That was never the goal, I replied. Removing one person doesn't fix a system. She studied me for a moment, then offered a small smile. We're expanding next quarter. West Coast office. I want you to lead the transition. I didn't respond right away. She added, it's not just a promotion, it comes with a board seat. Policy-making power. I looked at the folder in her hand, saw the title in bold. Chief Client Officer. Equity options. Voting rights. Real authority. Not a trophy. A platform. I'll review it, I said. She nodded, then left me standing there alone, but not isolated. Because success? It didn't come when I finally got a title. It came when the people who'd once been overlooked finally stood in the light. When Shay challenged a VP in a meeting and didn't flinch. When Jordan said no to a last-minute ask without being labeled difficult. When Theo trained a new hire and said, I've been where you are, stick with it. And when Brett sat at the table, not in control, but in contribution. The real revenge? Wasn't making anyone pay. It was building something so undeniably fair, so undeniably functional, that even those who underestimated me had no choice but to thrive inside it. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told to stay in your lane, I hope this story gives you hope. Because real success doesn't require taking someone else's seat. Sometimes, it's about redesigning the entire table. If that resonates with you, share your story below. You never know who's listening and who needs to hear it.